There's tired, and then there's exhausted. It's that feeling in your spirit, like your soul is running as fast as it can to catch the present moment. But it just can't quite get there. It's the commitment to a million things that are supposed to be filling you up, but they're only burning you out. All this more and more gives you less and less. You go and you're constantly connected. But the screens and the scurry turn up empty. This can't be the way. Life can't just be about hurry.
So I was running late for work one day. I was 17, working at Northgate Mall in Cincinnati. And I pull into the parking lot, and I get out of my car, and I just start power walking towards the building. Like almost a jog, but I'm not a crazy person, so it's a power walk. And I'm power walking towards the building, and I look over a couple rows over, and I see this dude with an incredible mustache get out of his car with a couple of his friends, and he just starts staring me down. I was like, well, that's weird. Good thing I'm power walking. Like, all the more reason to hurry, right? So I'm like power walking, and I get a little bit closer, and I look over, and dude's getting closer, and so are his friends, and he's still staring at me. And I'm like a little unsettled. Like, Northgate Mall's not known for being the safest of malls. And so I'm getting like really unsettled at this point, and I'm like picking up the pace, and I'm getting closer to the building, and I look over, and he's a few feet away from me, and he's still holding that stare. And I'm like, okay, what is about to happen? And he goes, hey, can I pray for you? And I was like, that's not at all what I was expecting. And I'm like, okay, sure, you can pray for me, but I'm running late to work. And in other words, what I was saying is like, okay, we can do this, but we're gonna have to do it on the go, because I'm not stopping. And so, like, all right, they're gonna pray for me. And so what happens next, I keep power walking into work, and they're all keeping pace with me, and I didn't really expect this, but then they close their eyes, bow their heads, and then each put a hand on my shoulder. And we just keep moving. And I'm the only one that can see. And we walk into the mall like this, and it probably looked really, really strange. But what's crazy about it was like in this moment, they were like totally present with God. Like they were just with him in that moment. And I'm just like, I've got my sights set on getting to work on time. And, they pray for me, and they finish the prayer. They keep walking with me. Mustache man asked me my name. We're talking a little bit. He says, Will, while we were praying, I feel like God gave me a word for you. I was like, okay, that's kind of cool, kind of encouraging. He gave me a word, He said, that word is bulldozer. And I was like, okay. He said, well, you don't stop for anything. You just keep going. If there's anything in your way, you can just push it aside and just keep going. And I kept thinking about that, like as they left, and as I went into work and clocked in, and I was thinking about that, and I wasn't so sure it was a compliment. Like I think he meant it in a really encouraging way, but I was thinking about it, and just like there was this opportunity in that moment to meet with God and to meet with his people, but I couldn't be bothered to stop because I was in such a hurry. I wasn't so sure I liked that. We're in this series right now called Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, and it's based off this book by John Mark Comer. And the book was inspired by a quote by philosopher Dallas Willard, and he says, hurry is the great enemy of spiritual life in our day. You must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. A few weeks ago, Jay identified this new term for us, hurry sickness. And this is what we experience when we're living a hurried life. A lot of us, we're distracted, we're busy, we're tired. We're living with unrest in our minds, in our bodies, and in our souls. For me, this story was not the end of my experience with hurry. Because for me, I have a tendency to say yes to more and expect more of myself because I believe the lie that I am not enough. And that's caused me to say yes to way too many things. That's caused me to burn out on multiple occasions. I've spent time working on my phone, like planning lessons and stuff, like on a Friday night sitting, around the table with my family. I've had, many times where I'd work on both my days off so I can get one more thing done or so I can accomplish something else to feel better about myself. And over the last several years, I've put some rhythms and boundaries in place so that I can live less of a hurried life. But to be honest with you, I still catch myself hurrying. Sometimes I still catch myself adding a long and ridiculous list of expectations for myself, or I find myself struggling to shut my laptop at the end of the workday because I'm just not sure if I worked hard enough or if I got enough done. I find myself still trying to accomplish more so that I can prove myself. And that causes me to feel really overwhelmed and get easily exhausted. That's a life of unrest. It's hard for us to ever slow down or stop if we don't think we're good enough. As we strive to feel better, as we keep ruthlessly bulldozing forward, trying to prove ourselves, we will miss what God has for us right here and now. Do you feel like that's you? Do you ever feel like you just can't stop? Or like you're going through life constantly in a state of low-level exhaustion? Do you go through every day carrying a heavy weight, or do you feel off kilter or anxious if you're not being productive? Do the most important people in your life get the best of you, or do they get something less? When people ask how you are, do you always say busy? And maybe for you that's not so bad. Maybe you're comfortable when you're hurrying, but when we are living that way, when we're living with unrest in our bodies, our minds, and our souls, I think it's a reflection of the lies that we believe about who we are. That we're unlovable as we are, that we don't have enough, that our value is in what we accomplish or in what other people think about us, or that we are too important to stop productivity. But Jesus promises us something better when we choose to follow him. Let's look in Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30. Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Now, for me, when I first read that, I was like, I don't know what a yoke is. I don't know if it has to do with an egg. It doesn't. It's actually a tool that's used to attach one or two animals to a cart or a plow that they would then pull. And of course, this would have been, familiar terminology to Jesus's audience at the time. And what Jesus is saying when he says, "Take my yoke upon you," he's saying, attach yourselves to me. Walk in step with me. Join me in my way of life. And when you do, you'll find rest for your souls. Because my way of life is not heavy, it's not hurried, it's not anxious. It is defined by rest. And I don't know about you, but I've read that passage many times, and I've been like, I don't know if that describes my experience. I don't know if I've ever experienced this rest for my soul that he is talking about. And I've been following Jesus for a while now, and so what am I missing? Maybe you're asking the same thing. Throughout this series, we're going through different practices from Jesus to help us eliminate hurry from our lives. And these practices help us tap into the rest that Jesus offers. Today, we're talking about Sabbath. And I don't know what you think of when you hear the word Sabbath. Maybe you think, it's the Lord's Day. That's the day we all go to church. Or maybe you think Sabbath, that's the day of rest. So I'm not going to go into the office. I'll stay home, watch some TV, maybe cut the grass. Maybe I'll check work email only if I get a notification. And I'll, do a couple loads of laundry instead of like 3 or 4. And today we're looking into Scripture to see what Sabbath really is. And how it is something that is so much better, so much more than just those ideas. We're going to do a quick fly through of 3 different passages about Sabbath, and naturally it starts in Genesis. So let's look at Genesis chapter 2, verses 2 through 3. It says, "By the 7th day, God had finished all the work he had been doing. So on the 7th day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done." What sticks out to me from this is that God rested. God rested. How many of you during a busy season try to muscle it through without stopping? You know, you might say, hey, I'll be fine. I can do it. I'm strong. I'm tough. Okay, maybe you will be. Maybe you are. But you're not stronger than God, and even he rested. And he set this precedent for all of creation. I mean, this is the moment he's literally creating the week. He's literally creating the world. And in it, he puts in a place to stop. Sabbath literally means stop. And he works this in on the seventh day. And he rested on the seventh day, and then he made it holy. In other words, he set it apart. He made it sacred. He made it special. This day is going to look different than all the other days. Let's fast forward a little bit to Deuteronomy chapter 5. Observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, as the Lord your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your ox, your donkey, or any of your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns, so that your male and female servants may rest as you do. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. So God commanded his people to observe the Sabbath. This was an excerpt from the 10 Commandments, and God is giving these commandments to Moses as he establishes a covenant relationship with his people, the Israelites. And so this is God saying to his people, hey, one of the most important ways for you to remain faithful to me is to observe the Sabbath. What I made holy, keep it holy. What I said is special, keep it special. Now, the other thing that I notice is that Sabbath is a way for the Israelites to respond to what God has done for them. It's a day to remember and to celebrate that they were slaves and now they're free. And this is an opportunity for them to rest in God's goodness and blessing on their life. See, but we often bulldoze right past the little gifts he leads us throughout the day. And this is a day, Sabbath is a day for us to finally slow down and to see the good that God is doing all around us and to remember and celebrate what he has already done for us, that we were slaves to sin and that now we're free. Now, if you're like me, you don't do well with rules and commandments, okay? The next passage is for you in Mark chapter 2. Jesus and his disciples are walking through grain fields, and they get a little bit hungry. So the disciples start, plucking heads of grain and eating them. And the Pharisees see this, and they go nuts because it's the Sabbath. They say, what you're doing, you're basically harvesting, and harvesting is work. So they're accusing Jesus of letting his disciples break the 10 Commandments. The thing is with the Pharisees that they were super legalistic and rigid about the Sabbath. And in doing so, they missed the very heart of what it was for. Because for them, it became about following rules instead of remaining faithful to God. And they used these rules to elevate themselves and to belittle other people that didn't follow the rules as well as they think they did. And so here they're using these rules to trap Jesus and to expose him as unfaithful. They said, why are your disciples breaking the law on the Sabbath? Jesus said to him, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. Notice how Jesus doesn't say, I'm Lord over the Sabbath, so Sabbath is canceled. Notice how he doesn't say, my disciples can't possibly break the law on the Sabbath because my followers don't practice Sabbath. He didn't say either of those things. Jesus was practicing Sabbath with his disciples, and he wasn't speaking against the Sabbath. He was correcting the misuse of it by the surrounding religious culture. He was reframing Sabbath and reclaiming it for his followers. See, Sabbath is not a day where we have to force ourselves into this unnatural, unsatisfying religious practice. It's not a day for rigid rules. It's not a day for legalism. It is certainly not a day for showing off or accomplishing or performing like the Pharisees were using it for. Sabbath is a day to rest and to delight in God. A day to remember that God has been good to us, to admire his work, to receive his gifts. It's a day to stop, to slow down our lives, to rest from our work. That's what it was made for you And for me, it's not a got to as much as it is a get to. It's a gift to us. What a great gift. The Pharisees were the religious leaders of the time, and so if you would have chosen to live the way of life of the surrounding religious culture, you would have been accepting this burden of expectation to follow the rules perfectly. And this burden of this addiction to accomplishment and performance. And honestly, that sounds like an awful way to live. That sounds like a really heavy burden and a really tragic way to live life. Yet in some ways, this is the life that many of us choose. Because if we're living a life of hurry, we're not living the way of Jesus. We're living the way of the surrounding culture. And the default setting of our culture is busyness. It's a culture where a person is defined by their accomplishments, by what they do, by what they are or aren't involved in. And if we don't actively choose something different than what our culture offers us, then that burden will be laid right on us. And that's a burden that will wear you out if it hasn't already. But Jesus invites us to come to him, to live his way of life, to experience something so much better. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. Practicing Sabbath helps us live out this passage, and it helps us accept the way of Jesus. And the way of Jesus is one that says you are allowed to stop. I tell our students all the time that God loves you despite your behavior, your progress, or your performance. And stopping one day a week reminds us of that truth. It reminds us that he loves us just the way we are today. And it gives us a day to rest in the fact that Jesus died for us to cover our sin, to cover our imperfection, that even though we fall short of who we want to be, of who God wants us to be, we are still loved by him and forgiven by him deeply. By resting in that once a week, every week, this truth sinks into our bones. That who we are is defined by God's love for us and not by what we do. So not only does Sabbath give us a day for physical rest, but it reorients our lives towards the gospel, which crushes those lies that we believe about ourselves. And I can tell you that that has been my experience with the Sabbath. Now, I can't tell you that I don't still struggle with those lies sometimes, but I get to wake up on Saturday mornings with no to-do list and just breathe in the grace of God, and that fills my soul. Lynne Baab says in her book, Sabbath Keeping, we are drawn to the words of Jesus about abundant life and about his peace that passes understanding, but often we don't know how to access them. The Sabbath is a concrete way to start, a practical and ancient solution to an enduring human need. Sabbath will help you find rest for your soul. Now, this practice, if you're unfamiliar with it, if you haven't practiced it, it can be a little bit of a challenge at first, and you may have some questions. The first thing that I want to make sure you know is that Sabbath is going to look different depending on who you are and your season of life. There's not a set formula. There's not a set schedule of what Sabbath needs to look like. There is so much freedom in it. Remember, Sabbath was made for man, not the other way around. So your first question might be, when do I practice Sabbath? There's a few different options. The first one is the traditional Sabbath, which starts at sundown on Friday and goes to sundown on Saturday. The second is the Lord's Day Sabbath, and this is a Sunday Sabbath, and what some of you might be more familiar with. And this is a great option because it's a day we're all worshiping together. A great way to start the Sabbath day. The third option is the midweek Sabbath. And that's where you just choose any day that works for you, because we don't believe there's a right or a wrong day to practice Sabbath. Rachel and I follow the more traditional Sabbath because we love Sundays, but they're a little crazy for us, so we Sabbath on Saturdays. Now, we've got this day carved out. Okay, we've chosen a day. What do we do with it? How do we fill this day? In his book, John Mark Comer talks about a filter that he has for when he tries to figure out what he's going to do on the Sabbath. And what he does is he asks himself this question: does it involve rest or worship? Because if it's one of those things, it's a great Sabbath activity. I ask myself, does this help me receive God's gifts? Am I slowing down enough to see the blessings that he's placed in my life in the prior week or in this very moment? Am I doing anything that involves working, earning, or proving myself? Because if I am, I'm not receiving the gift of his grace. Whatever you do, here's the important thing. Sabbath's not just a day off. Because remember, God made it holy. So it needs to look different than all the other days of the week. It needs to be special. I've heard from people that have practiced Sabbath for years and years, and for them, it's the day of the week that they most look forward to. And like they've described the anticipation and excitement of it. They've said it's like Christmas every week, which sounds really fun, really exciting, and really special. So how are we going to do this? And like I said, it might be kind of a challenge at first. If you're trying to take a whole day of rest, that can be tough at first. A lot of times it may not pay off until it becomes more of a rhythm for you. But I've got three things that might be helpful for you, things that I've learned from other people and things that I've learned from my own experience. The first thing is prepare. Rachel and I do something called our Friday Tidy. And there's a difference between my wife and I. I could totally walk past a pile of dirty clothes, a sink full of dishes, and a dead mouse in the corner and totally coexist with that comfortably. She's not like that, okay? She needs things to be somewhat orderly for her to relax. So what we do is we get home from work on Friday, we spend 30 minutes to an hour just tidying up, straightening up the house. It's not gonna be perfect. It's never gonna be as much as we want to do, but it's going to be enough. So are there things that you can prepare ahead of time to make the day lighter? Maybe you prepare meals ahead of time that you can just pop in the oven on the day, or you budget money to eat out, or you cut the grass so that's one less thing for you to think about. The second thing is plan. If you have ever been responsible for planning a date, whether you planned a date for your spouse or your significant other, you know the importance of a plan. If you want that time to be meaningful, you need to have some intentionality in planning. Back in my, my high school, my Northgate Mall days, this is before I really understood that to be important. And I go and pick up the girl that I was dating at the time, to go on a date, and she gets in the car, and I'm like, hey, what do you want to do? She's like, I don't know, what do you want to do? I'm like, I don't know, what do you want to do? And then we ended up at Taco Bell with the boys, and that was the end of that. So have a plan. And it doesn't need to be a complicated plan. If you're on Excel spreadsheet, you've gone too far, all right? Unless that's restful for you, but not for me. Just an idea of what's gonna happen. And just as important, an idea of what's not gonna happen. So for me, reading in my hammock on the Sabbath, that's the most filling thing for me to do. And I don't read nonfiction, I read fiction. I try to find the least productive book I can find. Right now it's a Star Wars novel, okay? And so find whatever it is for you. Maybe it's watching sports, playing board games, hanging out with your friends, decorating the house, baking, I don't know what it is. And you might say on the Sabbath, I won't look at a computer screen. I won't open the banking app. I won't answer that work call. I won't enter the laundry room, or fill in the blank with whatever is draining for you. And figuring that out, it might take some trial and error, and that's okay. The third thing is chill out. I tried so hard to make this start with P. I really did. Last week, Austin had 4 or 5 Ps, and I was really impressed by that, and I couldn't do it, but it's okay. Chill out. Don't overthink it. Remember, this is a gift, all right? Don't spend your Sabbath day thinking about if you're doing it right or wrong, or if you're doing it well enough. That is not what Sabbath is about. And don't feel pressure to hit 24 hours, because some stopping is better than no stopping. I do think 24 hours is a great goal because it takes time to enter deep rest, but something's better than nothing. Let's start somewhere. There is immense freedom in this practice of Sabbath. It is totally customizable. The stuff that some people do might seem really overwhelming and legalistic to you. Okay, don't do that. Do yours differently. Do it your way. And like I said, it's gonna be different depending on who you are in the season of life that you're in. When we have a foster child in our home, Sabbath looks completely different from when we don't. And when we have teenagers that are in sports, it's gonna look completely different than it does now. See, when you have kids, there are things that we have to do on the Sabbath that aren't restful. I've changed more diapers on the Sabbath than I would ever like to. But those aren't reasons not to stop. and rest from all the areas that we can. If you want to try this, then I want to plug you in with some other resources that might be helpful to you. The first one is a book called Sabbath Keeping by Lynne and Baab. It's just over 100 pages. It's a very easy, gracious, non-legalistic, and practical approach to Sabbath. I highly recommend it. If you're not as much into reading, then you can check out John Mark Comer's How to Unhurry digital workbook. And you can scan that QR code. It'll take you right to it. And this is a companion to the Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. And these are just some really helpful things if you're trying to figure out what this could look like in your life. Now, before we close today, I have to level with you all for a second. I'm the youth pastor, so I spend a lot of time with teenagers. And I have to tell you that our teenagers are being crushed under the pressures of performance. I've sat down with students who have so much fear surrounding school and sports, so much negative self-talk because they are struggling to believe that they are who God says they are. They're buying into the world's definition of who they are, and that is that they are what they accomplish. They're the grades they get, the goals they score, the teams they make, the amount of scholarships they get, and the schools they get into. And those are good and worthy goals, but they do not define who they are. I know there's not a parent in here who wants their kid to believe these things. But that is the default setting of our culture, and our kids will adopt that naturally if we don't proactively counteract those lies. Sabbath is not just a day to work some rest into our week. It's how we can weave the love and grace of Jesus into our daily lives and into the lives of our kids. It's a day to rest in God's deep love for us just as we are. Because Jesus loves you despite your behavior, your progress, or your performance. And as I look at the next generation, I see a generation that needs to hear that again and again and again and again. And I see a generation that could greatly benefit from hearing that for an entire day, one day a week. And I know you probably can't make your teenager Sabbath. But you can model a life of rest for them instead of the unsustainable life that we've been living. And you can give them the same gift that God has given you. You can lift from them the burden of expectation for one day a week, and you can take one day to intentionally remind them that they are not what they do, but who they are is defined by God's love for them. I like this quote from the book Sabbath Keeping. She says, "We move through our days as if what we do mattered more than who we are. The Sabbath is an opportunity to reclaim our heritage as children of God, created by God to live in grace." The only reason this incredible grace is given to us is because Jesus died to cover our sin.